Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4, playing some World of Warships Legends. And today we're here to review the Tier 6 Royal Navy Heavy Cruiser, Cheshire. Just like all my videos, we'll start out with some history, move into analysis before we talk about stats, and then show off a little bit of gameplay. If you do want to jump around though, chapters are set up on this video with the time codes down in the description. As far as history, it's probably no surprise that there's very little to talk about here, but I did run down a few bits of information to share here. Unlike some designs in the game that also did not exist, like the Odin in particular, which was not built because the guns used in its design did not exist, the 9.2-inch guns that we see here were actually very common in British service at the time. This included the use of 9.2-inch guns as coastal defense batteries on a few World War I era cruisers, and even as the rather impressively oversized secondary battery on ships like HMS Agamemnon. The particular type of gun that the Cheshire is depicted as using is actually the same model as was found on HMS Gorgon and Glatton, two British monitors which had started their lives as coastal defense battleships for the Royal Norwegian Navy, which saw some service in Britain's Royal Navy towards the end of World War I. But since the main battery that you see here is larger than 8 inches or 203 millimeters, any ships built with this caliber gun would necessarily have been considered a capital ship, otherwise known as a battleship, once the Washington and London naval treaties went into effect. Dedicating tonnage to making a battleship with 234 millimeter guns didn't make a lot of sense. But with the collapse of the naval treaty system, there was really no reason not to explore the possibility of making larger, more heavily armed cruisers. Churchill, at that point First Sea Lord of the Admiralty, ordered up a half a dozen designs in 1939, and a few more in 1940. The vast majority of these designs included more 8-inch guns than we see on most Royal Navy heavy cruisers that we have in the game so far. But the 9.2-inch gun was also considered, though some of the designs considered were far more ambitious than this, including up to 12 9.2-inch guns, which would have created a ship that weighed just about 4,000 tons less than a Dunkirk-class battleship at standard displacement. The Cheshire, as portrayed in the game, is therefore more of a creative product of wargaming to place these larger guns in a more reasonable number onto their interpretation of a 1,200-ton cruiser hull. Ultimately, no ships would be completed from Churchill's so-called supercruiser projects for a variety of reasons, including the cost, since 3 of these cruisers would have cost as much as 2 Vanguard-class battleships, as well as disagreements within the Admiralty about the overall need and capability of this type of ship. As far as the Cheshire in the game, I know very little positive has been said about this ship, and I'm not likely to change that trend all that much. Among Tier 6 cruisers, though, you can say that she's the toughest premium cruiser at the tier, which is due to this patchwork of above-average cruiser protection, but probably more significantly because of your best-in-class hit point pool. Will that help you? Yeah, kind of, but really not all that much. Just like all of the Tier 6 premium cruisers, survivability is still definitely an issue, because you can easily see here that there are plenty of weak spots in the armor scheme, and the ship does have an exceptionally large and vulnerable citadel. If you do take damage, and you will, you should be happy to know that you come with a heal, which is nothing really special for a British ship, but you don't have smoke, which does mean that you'll be more likely to take hits than maybe you'd otherwise expect. It's also absolutely huge for a cruiser at this tier, so that doesn't really help. Another thing that would almost sound like praise is the large caliber guns. While these guns do effectively pack a good punch with both HE and AP, and can overmatch pretty much every equal or lower tier cruiser, they have nearly battleship long reload times. This results in the lowest DPM of any cruiser at the tier. In fact, it's about half of the average DPM for cruisers at Tier 6. Now, that isn't all that surprising, considering usually high DPM ships tend to be ships that have difficulty penetrating other boats, and that's less of an issue with Cheshire considering the size of your shells, and it might be worth it if it wasn't for the truly tragic shell dispersion the Cheshire tends to suffer from. It also seems to overpen more cruisers when it isn't just deleting them, and yet it still struggles against battleship armor, even at close range. As a result, you do tend to last a little bit longer than you might otherwise last, but you'll accomplish very little in that extra time that you survive because of the limited number of guns, long reload time, and poor dispersion. And as we come to stats, there aren't any other 9.2-inch ships out there, or even a British heavy cruiser line in the game right now. So we'll just be talking about this ship versus the field mostly. So starting out with survivability, the Cheshire has a ton of hit points. Currently about 3,000 more than the next most healthy cruiser at the tier, and about 25% higher than average. She has 13 to 178 millimeters of armor, which is a pretty good range to have, but the more important part of this is the stuff that we've already seen, which is that you have pretty decent amounts of armor that are actually on the side of your ship and not just turret faces. This does mean that when well angled, you can create auto bounce angles versus battleship shells, but if they're smart, or get lucky, you're going to aim for the nose of your ship, and all of these hit points are going to go bye-bye real fast. When dealing with other cruisers, you can go bow in on them, which is nice, and they can't really do that much to you with AP. That is kind of a nice trick because with 234mm guns, it's not something that they can say back to you. That's kind of where the good news ends though, as far as the artillery is concerned, because you only have 6 guns, and this 17-second reload speed is, as one of my colleagues put it, totally brutal. With only 6 guns that aren't particularly consistent in the accuracy department and an extraordinarily long reload time, that means you'll often struggle to make damage in this ship. If you do hit, the large caliber of your guns is going to make sure that you pretty much always do partial HE damage, and each shell has a nice fire chance, even if your low rate of fire does make you, overall, not a great fire starter. The individual AP shells actually can do a pretty nice amount of damage. It's probably not surprising with the largest guns of any cruiser at tier 6, her individual shells have the best damage. It's only 250 damage more than the York's though, and that ship has 2 more guns. Which actually means that the York has a heavier potential broadside, and actually she's not alone. That's something that most tier 6 cruisers can say to the Cheshire. Your range is a bit above average for the tier if you count all cruisers, but on the low side of average if you're looking at heavy cruisers at the tier. And this turret traverse is nothing really special either way. All of this basically combines to mean that oftentimes, the thing that you think should make this ship most fun and interesting often feels like the thing that's really holding you back the most. But for what it's worth, and it's probably not worth much, she does have a decent secondary array. Like most Royal Navy cruisers, the Cheshire does have torpedoes. You have 1 quad launcher on each side. The 15,400 damage is pretty average, so is their 8-kilometer range and 61 knot speed. Detectability is also average, but the reload is a hair on the long side. It's not too much of a disadvantage because you'll rarely get multiple opportunities to get in that close and use these aggressively. Their one chief advantage is, like most Royal Navy torpedoes, you can launch them one at a time, or sequentially, which can be more useful than really any one of these statistics on the screen. When we come to speed, the Cheshire is actually surprisingly faster than your average tier 6 cruiser, by about a knot. Considering what a big girl she is though, it isn't surprising that the maneuverability is all downhill from there. This 720 meter turning circle is pretty wide, and the 10.5 second rudder shift is also fairly slow, in both cases being about 10% worse than the average, and really that does help you feel the size of this ship. But for whatever reason, the Cheshire's size is not actually reflected in her concealment, because she's actually reasonably stealthy. With 11.6 kilometers base, it's only 100 meters more visible than the Fiji. It's actually half a kilometer under the average. From the air, it is about average in terms of its visibility, but when firing in smoke, you're definitely a little bit more noticeable than most cruisers at tier 6. Though in spite of having the largest guns of any cruiser at this tier, you do actually come in 400 meters short of being the worst. For consumables, you do have sonar, which unsurprisingly is your fairly average cruiser sonar at the tier. You also have a heal, which is also a very standard heal and isn't really going to give you back all that much in terms of hit points. Still, it's useful enough that you'll certainly want to think about taking fully packed just to make sure you can make the most of it. The one reason we really want to come to this screen though is because of the lack of smoke available to this ship. It could be surprising to some, and it ends up being one reason you kind of need a big hit point pool, because you're probably going to take a lot more shots in this than you would in Exeter, London, or any of the Royal Navy light cruisers, which can hang out and fire at will from their smoke screens. And with all of that out of the way, let's get into some gameplay. We're going to be on North. Here you can see as the game starts up, I am just staring at the map. And as we do start up this match, I will go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. You can see I'm using John Jellicoe here because it gives me a little more juice out of my heel, and since he has a second slot concealment choice, this allows me to take double concealment and roam around the map with really, really low detectability and ignore people who are too far away from objectives to make much of a difference. And in this case, gets me closer to my enemies, where I hope my guns might be just a little bit more accurate and a little bit more punchy. Now, you will notice that I have also taken a nonsensical fourth slot improvement to my smoke. That is just an accident because this is set up still the same way that I was running around with the London and how I like to play the Exeter. So really take either one of the other two options, and this is a much better build. I think you'd pick up probably around 400, 500 meters on your range, or cut down your rudder shift just a little bit by maybe half a second. But obviously the smoke's not helping me at all since I don't have smoke. Now, does this build work? Solidly, kind of. Still, one of the things I was interested to see is if this ship could really punish broadside battleships, and the answer seems to be very rarely. I've shattered too many shells off the belts of ships like the Nelson, Queen Elizabeth, Ismail, and Sinop, even with Fraser as my captain, and at short distances where I'd have been better off just firing my torpedoes. In any case, I didn't really put this ship through its full paces because I suppose the nicest thing I can say about it is I wasn't really enjoying myself. But I imagine most of the things I've said about the London and Exeter would still probably apply here, even if the particulars vary from ship to ship. Now, this particular replay is full of a lot of errors, we'll say. This is essentially TacticAngel saying, "Ship be damned, I'm going to play World of Warships the way I want to." Our first set of mistakes was obviously a lot of that questionable accuracy, and obviously with only 6 guns, you can walk away with not a whole lot of anything. Mine was pretty questionable, but so were some of those dispersions. Now, as we're getting closer to this Boise, that is definitely more in the wheelhouse of things that I can hit. He is bow into me. This is one of the nice things about this ship. Obviously, I can punch straight through the front of his bow there. And when he's shooting at me, he's getting mostly the side of my ship. Now I'm going into this corner very, very hard. I am going to hit this island. And as you can see, I'm trying very hard to stop. I want to get here because I don't want to get shot by torpedoes. That little rock does give me a little bit of protection from the horrible things that the Ismail can do to me. that is just one of the unfortunate realities of the Cheshire. In a lot of situations, you will be playing this with just your front two guns. And as you can see, we managed to land a lot of shells in the neighborhood of that destroyer without actually hitting it. With only 4 shells and not great dispersion characteristics, that result is common, unfortunately. And I will say I did hit this island intentionally, but this is the worst way to hit an island because I could very easily make myself, I guess, a permanent fixture. Those of you who have expressed an interest in watching me faceplant, you're going to get a lot of opportunities in this particular match. All in all, though, I feel like this match actually gives me a lot to talk about when it comes to the Cheshire, though. It's not particularly poorly played, it's just not played right at all. And in this case, we're just putting some AP shells out there to see if we can't do a little bit of damage. We managed to get a couple of penetrations and a bounce, and you can see we walked away with 3,000 damage. So I'm going to guess either a full pen and I hit a turret, or something. Feelings of disappointment after a set of shells, also common in this ship. In spite of that, we have managed to do 47,000 damage. And the 2 citadels we have landed certainly helped add up some of that damage. What I'm doing right now is not a strength of the Cheshire, and that is running down destroyers. But as you can see, I've got 2 battleships behind me. They seem very interested in moving forward. So the smart thing for me to do is get out in front of them as much as possible to make sure we spot the torpedoes a little bit sooner. Unfortunately, obviously you can see our hydroacoustic is down. Sonar, I guess. And as we move forward, we're just going to have to proxy spot this guy. I am trying to change my course from the last time he saw me because I don't want him to be directly broadside to me. That's a bad time for everybody. It turns out he kind of is. But when you do hit, you can do a pretty good amount of damage with these HE shells. Obviously, 5,750 damage. Pretty good. Obviously, you're usually not going to score full pens on most ships, certainly not on destroyer, but, you know, if you get the half roll on that, that's still a ton. In this case, I'm not shooting at the Ismail because I'm not sure what my smoke penalty is in this particular game. Even though we just talked about it, you know, sometimes we just go out there and have fun. So what I'm doing right now is I can choose to shoot him or not because I have really excellent concealment. With this particular build, we're all the way down to 8.5 kilometers. I do hold my fire until it appears as though the Ismail is focused on someone else. That actually ends up being another mistake because, of course, everyone else can see me too. And now this Alba in front of me is going to start shooting me with HE. And in spite of the good armor that you might have, if somebody shoots you with HE in this ship, it's just going to chew you up. And since your reload takes forever, it can be really, really ugly, particularly against some of those tier 7 cruisers. I do have 2 fires, or at least for a second there. The last fire only had like 10 seconds on it, so I'm going to let that burn. Just because I know that there's a destroyer somewhere around here, and I don't want to take permaflooding. I'd probably be pretty screwed if a destroyer popped out again. So we're hoping that this Fiji is the only thing hanging out in this smoke. It's not. And we'll go ahead and shoot what we've got. We do all of the damage except for 1 hit point. And our secondaries finish off the job. Skill kill. Now, the other thing that you saw there right at the end is obviously I scored 2 citadels. That guy took 11,000 some hundred damage at the very end. But in spite of whatever armor you might have on this ship, if you do give up your broadside like that, you will have a bad time, which obviously I have. So another weakness due to our need to address that destroyer kind of shown off on accident. In any case, we are going to go on to win that. The Fijis was left with like no hit points whatsoever and was easily taken out here in a minute. So for some closing thoughts on the Cheshire, I mean, I don't have a lot of nice things to say about it. I don't think that this ship is all the way there, and I do hope that Wargaming show it a little bit of love in the future. It is nice to have this kind of wonky 9.2-inch gunboat out there. It's not really that much more effective than having an 8-inch gun, but it can help you beat up lower level ships because you can pretty much overmatch all of their bows. In any case, in spite of all of the errors and all of the weaknesses that I have shown off of this ship and all of my own shortcomings, we actually scored pretty decently, 2,800 XP. We made a good amount of money. Kind of a short review on this one, but I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I'll see you on the next one.